Hello and welcome to the Talking TED with Jenn mini video series that is happening throughout November 21st here on my YouTube channel. My name is Jenn Espinosa-Goswami. I'm a public speaking coach who helps folks up-level their presentation skills as well as grow their business, sell books, or sell programs behind the microphone. If you haven't joined us yet, this is my third video in this series. Last week I reviewed Amy Cuddy and Julian Treasure. I will link below this video for those reviews if you'd like to follow along and catch up. But today I'm super excited to share with you the TED Talk from Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie called The Danger of a Single Story. Let's get started. But before I jump into that, I do want to let you know you still have the opportunity to vote for my last TED Talk video. I do have a list of the top 25 TED Talk videos you can choose from. So see the description below this video and follow the list and see which one you'd like to vote for. To vote for it, just comment below this video. Let me know which talk title or speaker you would like me to review. You have the power to choose my last review because I just can't decide what my last video will be. So let me know what your thoughts are on that, and I'm happy to provide that. But you do have only until November 18th so that I have time to review the video and publish it to my channel. Make sure you subscribe also and follow along. But let's talk about Chimamanda, which you may notice that her name and her face are a little bit different than some of the other names and faces you see amongst the top 25 most popular TED Talks of all time. Now, she does have a name that might be difficult for some people to pronounce, and I do not receive the introduction for these TED Talk videos because it is edited out. But I will say, as a speaker who also has a name that can be difficult for people to know how to pronounce, as a speaker, it is your job to confirm with the person who's providing your introduction how to pronounce your name properly. Now, there are different ways you can do that, including recording your own video of yourself, sharing your name. There's even a way to do it on your LinkedIn profile where there's an audio option where you can pronounce your name for those who are brand new to you. So if you don't know how to do these things, send me a message and we'll figure out how to do that for you. I have that enabled on my LinkedIn platform, and I also provide my own name with each video I do. So if you don't do that and you're not currently confirming, if you're a guest on a podcast, you're showing up as an interview, it's your job as a speaker to clarify how to pronounce your name before you go live. So I did want to throw that out there. By the way, if you're new to this video series, I do provide a feedback form for each one of these videos. And this is the form that I use with my private coaching clients. If you would like a blank copy of this form so you can use it to review your own presentation, join my email list. You'll see the link in the video description here. Make sure you join and subscribe to my email list. And I will have a special opportunity for you to also receive my eyes and ears on your next presentation so you can make it the best experience ever. So let's talk about the details of Chimamanda's presentation. She delivered this TED Talk at TEDGlobal back in 2009, and it is about 18 minutes long and 2975 words. So if you've been following along with me on social media, you recognize that her pace, her speaking pace, is a little bit slower than some of the other videos I've reviewed, and I'll incorporate that in my feedback today for her. She has been viewed over 32 million times on this particular TED Talk. And I want to note a few highlights of her speech, give her some kudos. So on this particular speaker feedback form, what is important to know is I have different categories of things that I look at as an evaluator on your presentation skills. So today we're not going to talk about Chimamanda's organization. We're not going to talk about her goal because I, as someone who's never worked with her, has no idea what her goal was for this particular TED Talk. Instead, I'm going to be focusing on several key areas on my speaker feedback form. And the first one will be pitch and tone. So when I look at pitch and tone, I'm looking at it from an audience perspective. Now, Chimamanda has a very measured, deliberate pace with how she pronounces her words. This could be because of her accent or to make herself more easily understood, but she has a very measured and easy to follow pace and tone. Her tone overall was a bit serious. In fact, I'm going to show you a special part in her presentation where she said she laughs, but she doesn't laugh. She's extremely serious in this section of the talk. So I'm going to share that with you and then give you my breakdown of it.
Of Africa, a single story of catastrophe. In this single story, there was no possibility of Africans being similar to her in any way, no possibility of feelings more complex than pity, no possibility of a connection as human equals. I must say that before I went to the US, I didn't consciously identify as African. But in the US, whenever Africa came up, people turned to me, never mind that I knew nothing about places like Namibia. But I did come to embrace this new identity, and in many ways, I think of myself now as African, although I still get quite irritable when Africa is referred to as a country. The most reason.
So I wanted to share that particular segment of her presentation because this was not a point where she talked about laughter. That's a point I'll come to soon. But in this part of her presentation, which is about 4 minutes in, she suddenly had a bit of passion when she was talking. So prior to this point, she was very deliberate, very measured in her pace and her speed and her delivery. She had beautiful eye contact throughout her whole presentation, probably because she didn't have any slides or visuals for the audience to review. I don't know if TED Talk 2009 was prior to having a big screen behind you where you could share visuals. She delivered that eye contact consistently throughout. This snippet I just showed you was one of the few times in her talk where she actually delivered a different type of emotion with how she was speaking. Suddenly she got more excited, more energized, and you could feel that difference in her energy. But throughout the rest of the presentation, she kept same measured pace. She does break character a little bit, which is one of the kudos I have for her later during this review. Now, I do want to mention something from her introduction because I think the way Chimamanda introduced herself was quite distinct from some of the reviews I've done so far and some of the videos I've watched so far. She introduced herself by saying, "I am a storyteller." And throughout her presentation, she mentioned the word story or stories at least 30 times. As a speaker, repetition is going to be very important, not just for you as a speaker, but also for your audience. When it comes to ideas worth sharing, which is what TED is all about, repetition will be your best friend. It's not about delivering amazing truth bombs time after time or minute by minute. Instead, it's about repeating and creating touchstones and touch bases throughout the course of your presentation for that consistency and congruency. So Chimamanda made it very clear from the beginning. She's a storyteller. She will be telling us stories, and she shared many personal stories throughout the course of this, including her own personal embarrassment over some of her stories that she had of Mexican immigrants. So I think it's important to identify repetition is a really important technique as a speaker, not just to help you memorize, but also to help the audience feel comfortable and secure in what you're saying because you keep coming back to that same point. So I think that was very well done. I do want to share several kudos throughout the course of her presentation. I shared one already around minute 4:56 where she started getting passionate about this particular person's belief system about Africans and how they view them from their single stories. And it was not a positive time. Unfortunately, I do want to share one other where she broke character and wasn't as measured and wasn't as serious in her demeanor. And that happens around minute 11:03. So let's take a listen together as I navigate to this. She did a fabulous job around minute 11:03. Let's listen in.
And that it was such a shame that young Americans were serial
Let's go back a little bit.
Men were physical abusers like the father character in my novel. I told him that I had just read a novel called American Psycho, and that it was such a shame that young Americans were serial murderers. Now,
whether you've watched American Psycho or not, I'm sure you can connect to the humor in that situation. And she actually broke character. She became less serious. She started laughing about it. And that was when the audience was also there with her. The audience actually started laughing first. So she gathered that energy from the audience and finally gave herself a chance to relax a little bit. You know, she's halfway through her presentation, more than halfway through her presentation. Maybe her nerves were settled a little bit. And she was willing to laugh in that portion of her presentation, which was a good thing because we all want to find the human moments in our presentation. That's when our audience is going to remember it and have that feeling of connection with us. There is one other portion that I would like to share in terms of a kudos to Chimamanda that she did very well. Was her closing was very well done. Now remember, she hasn't used any visuals and she is very good with her pace and her deliberateness, but towards the end of her presentation, she stepped away from looking at her notes. You know, we understand as speakers that you will be looking down at your notes, and she did not need to look at her notes for her closing. So she did a good job of memorizing her closing and making strong eye contact as she closes, which is a very powerful technique you will be doing as a speaker who is well rehearsed and well practiced. Let's go ahead and listen to that together.
single story about any place, we regain a kind of paradise. Thank you.
Just a little bit.
About any place. To me, read the book, and the kind of paradise was regained. I would like to end with this thought, that when we reject the single story, when we realize that there is never a single story about any place, we regain a kind of paradise. Thank you.
What a powerful share that was. She did look at her notes briefly before her closing sentence, but she looked up, made eye contact with the audience, and made that further connection. So that was a very strong moment in her presentation that I wanted to highlight. Also, let's talk about who she used as references for her talk. As a writer herself, and she's written several best-selling books, she also mentioned about her Nigerian publisher and how they are leading workshops in Nigeria, her home country, to provide different stories, African-based stories to folks in Africa and across the world. So she's doing the good work out there, but she also gave a nod to famous literary figures. She mentioned three specific authors, one American author and two African-born authors. And then she also mentioned two international poets. So in the course of an 18-minute presentation, she has given a hat tip to her heroes in the literary world, which I think is very powerful and showcases a little bit about her background and what she brings to this TED Talk stage. Now, with everyone, I like to provide some next steps or action steps that you can do when it comes to improving yourself next time. Because, of course, we can do things very well, but sometimes in the moment we forget certain things, or there are things that we wish we could go back and change. And being curious about this, I have three specific things that I would really like to highlight. And the first one is her body language. Now, you know that I've already reviewed Amy Cuddy on her body language, but what are we noticing here with Chimamanda? What I'm noticing is when she's standing on the stage, she is behind the podium, her hands are crossed in front of her, and she's leaning a little bit and looking down at her notes. Not taking anything away from her delivery, because she had a very strong delivery, but she was closed off from the audience. There was a podium in between her and the audience, which creates a disconnect from the experienced audience is gathering from her up at that podium. And she kept her arms kind of crossed in front of her, which we know when we cover our stomach or cover our midsection, that's a protective gesture. So in terms of delivering her speech in a more powerful way, she could have opened up, stepped from behind the podium, stepped away from the notes a little bit if that was something that was within her comfort zone to make it a more powerful presentation overall. She also coughed a few times during her presentation. So one of the things I recommend speakers do before they hop on a stage, at least the hour before they hop on a stage, is make sure they're well hydrated with flat water that's not cold. So if you're a person who forgets to drink water, doesn't like to drink water, that would be a good tip for you, especially when you're nervous and you're going to get on a huge stage in front of hot lights. Make sure you're well hydrated. Coughs will happen. Sometimes we don't bring our drink with us on stage, or we don't want to stop our flow as we're speaking. That's okay, but make sure you hydrate ahead of time without feeling like the need that you stop for the restroom. So maybe that would have helped her with her cough. I don't know. She could have been sick. So just throwing that out there as a consideration. And there's one other section that I mentioned earlier in this video, and I got the wrong video snippet, but I would say that she delivered a very serious story about her roommate when she went to college in the United States. And her roommate had some very particular ideas about Africans. And then she mentioned a famous author and some language that he used to describe the people in Africa, and it was not very nice language. So she shared what he talked about. And then she said that she laughed about it in this moment, in this particular presentation. She did not laugh. So that was kind of a disconnect. Again, this is a very small thing, and it's not something that took away from the power of her talk overall. But I think it's helpful to look at it and watch it together to understand, like, how could she have improved that moment within her presentation? And it was within the first third, or first act, as I like to say, of her TED Talk. So I'm going to try to get to the right moment here, and we'll listen in together.
Foreigner. I would see Africans in the same way that I, as a child, had seen Fide's family. This single story of Africa ultimately comes, I think, from Western literature. Now, here's a quote from the writing of a London merchant called John Locke, who sailed to West Africa in 1561 and kept a fascinating account of his voyage. After referring to the Black Africans as beasts who have no houses, he writes, "They are also people without heads, having their mouths and eyes in their breasts." Now, I've laughed every time I've read this, and one must admire the imagination of John Locke.
That is the moment in her presentation. Of course, she had just said some very sobering words when she quoted John Locke, and it was not something that would bring a smile to anyone's face, certainly not someone who is of that nation and is being described in such a manner. So I understand why she did not smile, why she did not laugh. But her sentence where she said, "Of course I laughed about that," she still seemed very serious. So just a small little thing to note when it comes to presentations, continuity, congruency, and consistency are important. And I think she wasn't in the place emotionally at that time where she could laugh about it. So perhaps she would have removed the mention about, "Oh, I laughed many times about that." Maybe she would have just gone straight to the admire his imagination, because again, she's giving a nod to another writer. And while it was not accurate and it was not a good depiction of the people of that nation, she was including it for a particular reason in her TED Talk presentation. So today we've heard different kudos about Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie's presentation called "The Danger of a Single Story." I chose this talk for many reasons, but I think it's important, especially in the years following George Floyd, that we become aware of how our stories impact how we view different people and our stereotypes. As she said in her talk, stereotypes are not wrong, but they're incomplete. And I think that's an important thing to take away from this particular TED Talk. My name is Jenn Espinosa-Goswami. Join me for my next review, where I'll be looking at Daniel Pink's The Puzzle of Motivation. I'm a big fan of Daniel Pink, so I'll do my best to be objective rather than subjective. But make sure you subscribe to my YouTube channel if you enjoyed this, and or share this review with your community. This is the type of work I do as a public speaking coach. I help folks with their presentation skills, and I also help them get clear on how to deliver exactly what their audience is looking for. So thank you so much for joining me today, and we'll see you on Thursday.